Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're really diving into some material that describes, well, nothing less than a huge global economic shift happening right now. Our mission, as always, is to pull out the key insights. And this time, it's about the potential end, really, of the US dollar's long reign. We're talking 6 decades as the main global currency.
So let's set the scene. The sources we've got describe this very strategic, very intentional rise of other payment systems. And it seems to be driven mostly by the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. There's this underlying tension, isn't there? The sources frame it like, well, like any empire built on dependency eventually runs into trouble. One source even compares it to the British Empire losing its financial grip back in the mid-20th century. Makes you think.
Yeah, that comparison is pretty important, I think, because it shifts the question, right? It's not if the dollar's losing its hold, but maybe how fast and, who's picking up the slack. And BRICS, well, they're not small players here. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, together they make up something like 40% of the global economy. If you measure by purchasing power parity, PPP, that's huge. So the sources basically say if BRIC managed to build a unified financial system, that's it. That's the biggest challenge the dollar's dominance has ever really faced. They have the weight to shift the balance.
Okay. Let's unpack that a bit more. Why is this happening now? I mean, the dollar worked fine for trading for ages, didn't it? What kicked off this big push for de-dollarization? The sources are pretty blunt about it. They say the issue wasn't the dollar itself as money, but how Washington started using it, like an economic weapon.
Right, and that framing weapon is key. It suggests the motive here is more defensive, not really offensive. This whole thing speeding up in recent years, it seems to come down to maybe three main drivers. First, just more global tension geopolitically, which led the U.S. to use sanctions more, often big, targeted ones. Second, the fact that the whole world depends so much on the dollar. That creates a weak spot, right, for any country that might disagree with Washington down the line. And third, well, it's just a basic desire from lots of big economies for more flexibility, more independence, payment systems that aren't tied up in politics.
Yeah, and that weaponization idea. That's where it really seems to hit home, where motivation turned into actual action. The sources are saying the real trigger, the thing that panicked everyone globally, maybe it wasn't just old history. It was seeing the fallout from the Russia-Ukraine conflict directly, visibly, seeing how fast the U.S. and its allies could basically try to shut down a major economy, freezing assets, hitting them with tariffs.
Exactly. It was like a massive warning flare for every central bank out there, a really clear signal. Countries suddenly realized, hold on, if our trade is in dollars, if our reserves are in dollars, we're just one policy decision away from disaster if we ever end up on the wrong side of the U.S. That single event, it created this real sense of urgency. Alternatives weren't just nice to have anymore. They became essential for national security, really, economic security.
Okay, so sanctions were the trigger.
Yeah.
Got it. But what was the response? The coordinated plan? How exactly are these BRICS nations trying to build this parallel financial world?
Well, their strategy seems to have two main parts. First, focusing on trading in their own local currencies. And second, building specific digital tools, digital solutions that are independent. They're not necessarily trying to print a competing world banknote right away. It's more about building the plumbing, the rails underneath the current system.
Right, and we see that in the specific projects the sources mentioned. Like, there was an announcement mid-2025, apparently, that BRICS nations are really pushing hard on local currency trade and these digital solutions. But maybe we should clarify these digital things.
Yeah.
They sound kind of similar. BRICS Pay, BRICS payment system. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. Good point. The sources talk about two main things. One is BRICS Pay. You can think of that as more like the consumer end, maybe a digital wallet or a card network, something people can use day to day across member countries for local currency payments. Quick, easy. But the other one, which is maybe more important for the big picture institutionally, is the formal BRICS payment system. Now, that is meant to be the alternative to SWIFT. SWIFT is how banks send messages to each other globally now, controlled largely by the West. It's like the banking world's post office. The BRICS payment system aims to be their own digital post office for banks, cutting out the dependency on SWIFT.
And then there's the gold thing. The sources mention BRICS countries putting a new emphasis on holding gold reserves instead of just dollar reserves. That feels pretty symbolic, but also practical, like a deep distrust in, well, money controlled by another political power.
Oh, absolutely. Gold is, the classic non-political asset. It doesn't belong to any one country's policy whims. So by boosting gold reserves, they're signaling they want stability. They want to disconnect from decisions made in Washington. And this isn't just talk either, this shift away from the dollar. It's actually showing up in the numbers now. You can measure it.
Yeah, the data points and the sources are pretty startling. The speed of it, especially. We're talking about the dollar having its worst half-year fall since way back in 1973. And to put a number on it, a 10% drop. Just in the first 6 months of 2025. I mean, that's not a small fluctuation. That kind of speed, it suggests something deeper is changing structurally.
Definitely. And if you look at where that value is going, well, you connect the dollar's fall to other currencies. On July 1st, 2025, the dollar apparently hit its weakest point against the euro since September 2021. But the euro, it actually grew significantly, 13.8% growth in that same first half of 2025. So capital isn't just vanishing, it's moving, diversifying into other currencies like the euro and, as we said, into things like gold reserves.
Right. So given this kind of, well, erosion, what about the reaction from the U.S.?
Right.
The sources report some pretty strong pushback, especially from former President Trump. He apparently issued a very direct warning to BRICS. Yeah, the quote was something like, say goodbye to political relations with America if they keep trying to ditch the dollar. That kind of language. It really shows how seriously this is being taken, doesn't it?
It does. And it wasn't just words. There was a threat of action, too. That 10% figure comes up again. The source says Trump threatened to slap 10% tariffs on the entire BRICS group. That includes major partners like India if they try to, quote, harm the dollar. And his statement, dollar is king? Well, it confirms the view that the dollar's reserve status is tied directly to U.S. global power. And they're prepared to use trade policy, weaponize it even, to defend that status.
Wow. Okay. But despite those pretty heavy warnings, it seems the big BRICS players are still moving ahead, carefully planning. Let's zoom in on India for a second. The sources seem to position India as quite central in actually doing this de-dollarization, often using digital methods.
Yeah, India's approach looks quite strategic. It started with these specific bilateral deals. Like India and Mauritius apparently plan to do all their business in local currency, cutting out the dollar completely. That was discussed at a meeting in Benares back in September. So these individual deals, they start to chip away at the dollar's necessity, one partnership at a time.
But it's more than just one-off deals, right? There's infrastructure being built. The Reserve Bank of India, the RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra, specifically asked the Clearing Corporation of India Limited, that's CCIL, the main clearinghouse for India's finance, basically. He asked them to get the infrastructure ready. And the goal seems huge, to handle rupee trade and settlement with currencies other than the U.S. dollar. So this isn't just small trade deals anymore. It sounds like a clear push for rupee globalization on a bigger scale.
Exactly right. And to make that happen smoothly, globally, India's leaning on its own successful digital systems. They're actively promoting things like UPI and the RuPay card network in other countries.
Yeah.
The idea is if other nations adopt these Indian systems, it makes local currency trade super easy. It bypasses the old Western financial pathways entirely. And at the same time, it promotes the Indian rupee itself as a currency people can use internationally for trade.
And looking beyond just India, we see this pattern across other BRICS members too, right? This coordination. Russia and China. The sources say they're settling over 80% of their trade directly in ruble and yuan now. And India and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are also using their own national currencies for trade. Again, bypassing the dollar in really significant markets.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I think, is that it's not just the core BRICS countries pushing for this. Even nations that were traditionally very close to the U.S. seem to be joining this sort of revolt for flexibility. The sources point to Saudi Arabia and China signing a massive 50 billion yuan currency swap deal back in November 2023. The whole point, to